Hey, and welcome back to another Learning Java 2D Game Programming video. So in our last video, we made some optimizations and improvements to our UI so that now inside of the editor, we can hide some of these menus. And now we have a lot better frame rate than we had before because we're caching these containers images. So today I want to get to placing scenery. So currently in our scenery tab, we've just borrowed this part and that's not going to be there, of course. So we're going to get a placer, and I've been working on a pine tree and I'm going to show that to you. So I put mine in resources, in sprites, and I've made a folder called scenery. And here I've placed my pine tree. At least it's supposed to be a pine tree. So I made it in Blender and rendered it out just like with our units. So we're going to make an object with a game object derivative, which I'm going to call scenery. And we're going to make a placer mouse action for it and a little UI menu to hold it. But first, we are going to do a little bit of refactoring. So I've decided we're going to use this UI tile toggle. So let's make this more general. And I'm going to place the cursor up here, press Shift F6, and I'm going to call it a UI tool toggle, right? Because currently we store a tile placer in here. We don't have to. We can store a mouse action. And I'm going to Shift F6 and call this a mouse action. And I think that's it. So the tool toggle now, we don't take in a tile. So let's instead take in an image and a mouse action. So instead, let's say this dot image is equal to a new UI image, and we'll just pop in that image that we had, that we sent in. The mouse action is this mouse action, of course. So this dot mouse action is equal to mouse action, the one that we sent in. And I'm just going to say that size is this dot image dot get size. So we're using this UI image. And that's the change that we're going to do in here. Just to make this work, we need to pop over to the tile menu editor state. So this is sad now, of course, because we're making this UI tool toggle and we're not sending in the right things. So now it wants the image first. So let's just get the sprite from our indexed tile. And then it wants the mouse action. So that is a new tile placer, and it needs a tile, and we have the indexed tile. So just doing this, we've made this tool toggle more general, and it should work like before. So let's check if that's true. And it loaded everything in. It seems that we can click it. It seems that we can place it. It looks just like before. Let's turn on auto tile. Whoop. Yes. All right, so it sure looks like it works like before. Awesome. Now we're going to be able to use this component for our SceneryPlacer as well. But I'm going to do a little change in the rendering system. So I've decided that draw collision box doesn't belong in here anymore in the debug renderer. We're gonna do that inside of this render. So if you go to render game objects, actually just paste this private method at the bottom. So we have this draw collision box. And let's go to the render game objects and open up for each game object. Make it a block like this. And then after we've rendered the image of the object, let's check if we should render the collision boxes, because then we will. And that means we need a setting for it. So let's find the game settings, render settings. Here, I'm going to duplicate should render grid, and I'm going to call this collision box. So I decided that we don't need the should render probably because we're inside render settings. So it's sort of redundant. So I'm actually going to press Shift F6. I'm just going to call this grid. So this will make it a little smaller, a little easier to read. But all right, let's also make the collision box false by default on initialization. And I am going to make a getter for the collision box. All right, so now if you go to the debug renderer, we actually don't need this entire thing. We're not drawing it from there, which means we didn't need the camera as well. So the effects, we might also refactor this to work like the other one. Oops, sorry, shouldn't have done that. Only wanted to do this. But we'll hold off on that for now. Only do the thing that we need today. So now we can go back into our renderer and we can say that if state get game settings, get render settings, get collision box, get value. So if we should render the collision boxes, then do draw collision box. We have our game object, get collision box, and we'll pass in the graphics and we'll pass in the camera. All right, so that is changed, but now we also need a way to flip it on and off. And I'm going to go into the editor state, into the UI render settings. Here I'm just going to copy this UI checkbox. I'm going to call it call.box so it isn't too large. It doesn't really matter if it's upper or lowercase for me because my font that I'm using only supports uppercase. So everything becomes uppercase whether you want it to or not. And the setting is, of course, get collision box. So let's just check that out. We're not going to be able to see any collision boxes in the editor, but at least we can see if the setting is there and it's turning on and off. So that is good. That's what we want. And this is going to help us when we start placing our scenery so that we don't have to go into play mode or anything to see what the collision box looks like. All right, so let's get to making our new game object. I'm going to go into our entity package, new Java class. I'm going to call this scenery, and our scenery object is going to be the same object for everything, every static object that we put as scenery. So it could be a tree, it could be a bench, it could be bush, it could be a sign, it could be any of these things. They're all going to be this scenery object, and that's going to make it a lot easier for us when we save and load our scenery objects. So this extends, whoop, that was fun. This extends game object. Alt enter, implement methods. There we go. So the collision box, let's see, get collision box. Are we doing that? Get collision box. So we basically want this, but without the motion. So I'm just going to copy that from the moving entity. I'm going to take away the motion. So I'm just going to copy position. Maybe it's enough to just say position. It will hide the position in our in this object because we have a position from the game object called position, but I think it's fine. So here's a problem. We don't have the collision box size inside of the game object, and we should. It's really just it's placed in the wrong place. So the size of the collision box, let's put that inside of the game object instead. We already have the position collision box offset here, so it makes sense. The game object knows about the collision box. So let's also move this initialization from the moving entity into the game object. There we go. Now this should be happy. So that's how we want that to work. And now let's talk a little bit about what we want in our scenery. So our scenery, really, it is just an image with a position and a size and a collision box position and a size. And the only thing that's really going to differ is whether it's going to be walkable or not. So we can have scenery that is walkable, such as bushes, maybe. You can walk over them, it's fine. And then maybe the tree, you cannot. So that will hinder you. But really, that can just be a Boolean, and then everything can be the same object. So let's first keep a sprite, so an image sprite. I'm gonna also have actually a string name that might be helpful in the future for editors and stuff. And for now, we're gonna use the name as the name of the sprite. So let's also have a Boolean that is walkable. All right, let's make a constructor. So first I'm gonna have a noargs constructor because I already know that we're gonna need it when we save and load and things like that. But then let's make the constructor that you would normally use. And this is gonna be quite large since this scenery object is gonna be able to handle many cases. So here's what this will look like. And I'm gonna put each of these on a separate line because they're gonna be many. So first, let's take the name. Then let's take the size. And then let's take the render offset position and the collision box size, the collision box offset, a Boolean walkable, and then let's just get the sprite library so that we can fetch the sprite. So let's import size and open up our constructor. So now we need to set all of these things. So this dot name is equal to name. This dot size is equal to size. This dot render offset is equal to render offset. This dot collision box size is equal to collision box size. This dot collision box offset is equal to collision box offset. And this dot walkable is equal to walkable. And that was it. So I'm just going to make load graphics so that we can use it from our loading and saving methods later. So just load graphics, and I'm going to give it the sprite library. Create that method, and this is just going to do sprite is equal to sprite library get image, and we're using the name that we're storing. So currently the file name is going to be the name of this object. All right, I think that's good for now. We're not going to do any updates, so this is just going to be a static object. So this object doesn't update. The sprite will just return the sprite. And we've already done the collision box. So I feel like this is good. Now I know that we're going to need a copy of for this. So when we place an object, we don't want to place the reference to this object, because then all the objects on the map will reference the same object, and when we change the position, then that will just move. So it's still going to be just one object. So we need to copy everything. And so we are making a public static copy of the way that we've done before. Sorry, we need a return type, scenery. And scenery. All right, so I'm just gonna make scenery copy is equal to a new scenery. It's gonna have nothing at first. And normally we make getters and setters, but since we are currently inside of our scenery class, we can access all of the members directly. And I feel like this is a time where maybe it's okay to do that. We are in full control and we're not leaking these variables outside of our scenery class. So this will just make it easier. We don't have to have getters and setters or protected getters and setters for things we don't want to expose. So let's just do it like this. Copy dot name is equal to scenery dot name. Copy dot position is equal to scenery. And here actually, here we need to make a copy of the position because otherwise we're going to just look at the same position. So copy of scenery dot position. Then let's do copy dot size is equal to size copy of, and we never made this, so we're going to do that now. So let's just put the cursor there, Alt Enter, create method, because it's just going to return a new size of the size, get width, and the size, get height. All right, so we're copy of the size, then let's say copy render offset equal to position, copy of scenery render offset. So copy dot collision box offset is equal to position copy of scenery dot collision box offset. Copy dot collision box size is equal to position size copy of scenery collision box size, and copy dot sprite is equal to scenery dot sprite, and copy dot walkable is equal to scenery dot walkable. Let's just return that copy. All right, so here is our copy method. It is a little larger, but it's gonna work. So I think that was it for that. So we have our scenery object. Now we need an action. So I'm going to go over to mouse action, and I'm going to make a new action that I'm going to call SceneryPlacer, which extends mouse action. And we implement all of the necessary methods. So this is going to have a scenery that we're going to place, and it's going to have an UI image, which is the preview, and import that scenery. So first, let's make a constructor with just the scenery, and the preview will make to a new UI image with the sprite from the scenery. All right, so in the update, first let's copy the position of our mouse position, copy of state, get input, get mouse position. So we have a copy of the mouse position. Let's add the camera position. So now let's set the position for our scenery. And then for our preview, let's set absolute position scenery.getRender position using the state.getCamera. So this is what we use in our renderer as well. All right, that should be fine. For the getSprite, let's just return the preview. And we're not going to do anything on click. However, on drag, actually, let's not be able to drag. Dragging, I feel like it's fine when we have tiles, but when we have objects, let's actually click. So I'm going to say state.spawn and scenery.copy of scenery. So this should work as our placer. So let's be able to use it. Let's go over to the editor UI, and I'm going to go to, we're going to make a new UI here. So I'm going to say UISceneryMenu. And this will be a horizontal container. So we're just creating that constructor matching super. So this is going to need the sprite library, and we say super window size. Let's first set the background color to dark gray. And then let's add a UI component, which is a new UI tool toggle. And first, let's just get the sprite library, get image, and I'm going to say pine tree. And then let's make a new SceneryPlacer that needs a new scenery, right? And here comes the long part. Now we need to give it all of these things. So pine tree. And I've luckily already looked at some of these values, so we don't have to search for them. So it's quite large, the tree. And here it needs the render position. So if you press Control P, actually outside of this, maybe? No. I'm just going to give it 96 for X and 128. All right, if you press Control P here, you can see all of the things that it's expecting from us. So now it wants the collision box size. So that will be a new size of 32 and 96 for height. Now, if you press Control P, it wants the collision box offset, which will be a position of 16 and 64. And I'm going to say walkable false, and then just pass in the sprite library so it can load its graphics. So, all right, now we have the menu. Now we just have to enter it to the editor state. So here in the scenery, let's, instead of using the render settings, make a new UISceneryMenu and pass in the window size and the sprite library. And I feel like the sprite library, there's something we haven't done. If we head over to the sprite library, yes. So here we need to load images from our newly created folder, which we called scenery. There we go. Otherwise, we're just going to get a null pointer exception. So let's play and see what that looks like. Scenery. Here is our tree, and we can place it. And if we turn on collision box, here you can see what the collision box look like. So great. I'm just going to load the other map. So currently we only have the placer, so we can't, if you want to remove or anything, we cannot. We'll of course fix that. But also we can't save either, so we have some things to do before we are done. But yeah, also we're gonna need to add it to the minimap. But I feel like all of these things need to be in the next video because this one is getting long. But now you can place the trees. So how cool is that? And since we have this scenery in the future, maybe we could have a dialogue for adding new objects to our game. So instead of doing it like we did here inside of here, we could have a dialogue in game where we can see and we can edit these values directly. So we don't have to start and look and then go back and edit and then look and then go back and edit. And then we could just keep, then we can, just like we were saving the game map, we can also save like an atlas maybe or something with the scenery that we have added to our game. I feel like it's going to be good, but let's not start there because that will be a little work. This will work for us for now. However, when I tested earlier, I found a bug. So you can place a tree here, but if you go over here and place, nothing happens. And actually it is placed, you just can't see it. And it's a bug with the camera. So let's find the camera class. And the bug involves, let's see, where is that? Here, calculate view bounds. We only do that if we have an object with focus present, so that's silly. So let's just move that outside of the if statement. We want to do it no matter what. So if you were to try that again, and then pop over here, get your tree out, there you can see it's working. So that's all for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Hej då!